Holy moly, welcome back, everybody. Thanksgiving break is over. Dr. Sears is back in Bluefield. And boy, do I have a story to tell. Um, yeah, it was quite a wild Thanksgiving. And it gets a little bit redneck, so I think y'all are going to love it. Anyways, my brother in law came up to visit for Thanksgiving, right? So he came up on Thursday, drove up from West Virginia up to where we're living in Pennsylvania. And as soon as he gets in the driveway, his Jeep breaks down. So it's kind of like Cousin Eddie, Christmas Vacation, right? He's broken down right outside the house. Um, Initially, what we thought was coolant instead turned out to be this red fluid called transmission fluid, right? And it's pouring out of this Jeep, okay? Like it's been stabbed in the back more times than Caesar, all right? Got to clean that up. So we get that all taken care of and just kind of forget about it because it's Thanksgiving. It's the weekend. No way we're getting this thing in a shop. So we tried it, after it stopped leaking, we tried it one more time, but it started leaking again. So we stopped. Um, and so this morning, right? Monday morning. He's got to get back down to West Virginia to go to work. So I'll loan him my vehicle, right? So I give him the van, and I'm like, just take this. But the van's also not in that great of shape. It's the next one to break down probably, and I'm already shopping for a new ride. So, but I sent him for that. He did eventually make it, and so did I back in West Virginia as well. So today, this is sort of like the last, I guess, real lecture for the semester. This is a straggler from um, the week before last that I didn't get quite finished because we ended up going on a field trip. But this is going to be about pumping and drainage. There's a few equations in here, and then a lot of sort of concepts that I think are important to understand. So with that, I want to get started with a second story. Right, two stories in a row. What are you doing? But it's short. All right, and it's just to show you that knowing some of these things, remembering these equations, it's not just important in mining. You never know when you might need to use it. So I was at dinner one night. I was sitting at a bar eating pasta, probably I think, and my brother calls me, and they have a friend that's a missionary, and he was currently in Africa at this village, and they were having issues with their well pump, right? And so they weren't getting enough water. They couldn't supply water 24 hours a day. They'd pump it overnight and store it, and then release it the next day. And it just was not working out for him. And he's like, "Can you help?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I'll let me look up some equations and some numbers and get back to you." So I'm sitting at the bar, basically just grab a napkin, and start looking up these equations and looking up friction values for pipe and that sort of thing. And I came up with, the amount of head they need to have, the horsepower of their pump, and the size of their discharge line so that they could have water 24 hours a day. So I told them that. Guy went out, got a new pump, got it in, and it was working good. So you never know when knowing some of this stuff might come in handy. So it is extremely important to control water in a mine. And I'm not talking about an inundation. I'm talking about groundwater inflow, maybe water from a stream, maybe water from adjacent or overlying mines. Um, but it is controlled. Okay, so this water comes in through the ground, you pump it out in a controlled fashion, that sort of thing. Pump performance is typically plotted on a characteristic curve, right? So pump manufacturers will have these curves for their pumps, and you can go look at them in their uh, books and that sort of thing, look them up online. But what we're going to do is look at this one and sort of look at how to read it. Okay. So the first thing you want to look at is the efficiency curve here, which you can see has a peak efficiency of just under 90%, right? And if we follow that straight down, we come to the head curve. And if you look to the left, that vertical axis is head and feet and pump efficiency, right? So we're just over 60 in this case, feet of head that this pump will produce or will be able to overcome, right, at its peak efficiency. And that corresponds to a brake horsepower that is just under 200, right? Just under 200, and a quantity that's right at 10,500 gallons per minute, right? So 10,500 gallons per minute. Okay, so with that, it's also important to note that you may be running a pump that's a bit outside of its peak efficiency, or you may be running a pump that has to deal with, more than one sort of level of head, right? Maybe it's going, pumping up and down, that sort of thing. So maybe you might not be operating at this peak efficiency, right? So if we look at the sort of top end where you get to about 80%, when we look at that number, you'll see that so our efficiency is less than the peak. We can only overcome a head of 50 feet, just over 50 feet, right? And the horsepower of that would be just over 200, so maybe 210, to get a flow rate that is just above 12,000 gallons per minute. That's what that means on this chart. If you look at the opposite end, come to 80% on this side, where you're less than the peak efficiency, the head that you can produce gets up close to 70, right? And the horsepower goes down, right? So the power requirements are less, maybe about 180, 185, something like that. However, you have to look at the sort of capacity of this pump in thousands of gallons per minute, and you'll see that it is now significantly less, maybe about 8,000 gallons per minute. Okay. In this case, when we're talking about friction losses for fittings on pipes, a lot of times are negligible. Not always, but a lot of times, and they're often ignored. Except maybe something like this in the larger diameters of check valves, right? Or side tees, that sort of thing. But most of them have very small values and typically get ignored. Friction head, that's calculated using the following equation and is based on 100-foot lengths of pipe. In this case, C is a constant. It's usually 100, and it counts for the roughness of the pipe. Q is the rate of flow in gallons per minute, and D is the inside diameter of the pipe in inches. The frictional head values, often these are tabulated in a table that you can go look up. Right, so for example, let's look at a nice even number, say 200 gallons per minute in a 5-inch pipe, and that gives you 1.5 feet of head. Now remember, that's for 100-foot lengths of pipe. So if you had 1,000 feet of this pipe, then your friction head from the pipe itself, just pushing water through it at that flow rate, would be about 15 feet. You can also calculate the velocity head. It's also often ignored, where V is the velocity of the liquid, feet per second. G is the acceleration due to gravity, which is 32.2 feet per second squared. So like I said, usually this can be ignored. However, if you do have high velocities, you may want to just double check, right? Because velocity is the squared term here. So this is increasing with the square velocity, means that as that velocity increases, that value is going to get higher much faster. Okay. So just generally speaking, dewatering systems are usually more complicated than station duty systems. Now, what are those? Dewatering, you can think of, say, just think of, dewatering an abandoned mine, right? That's kind of what that is. Most of the time, you're talking about pumping through boreholes from the surface. A lot of times, you're talking about submersible pumps, that sort of thing. What we just talked about is applied to centrifugal pumps specifically. And then, so like a station duty system would be more like, for example, pumping from a sump. You'll pump from one sump into the next, and then from the next sump, eventually out of the mine. That would be a station duty system. It's easier to design because you typically have, flow rates that are regular. With mine dewatering, things can get much more complicated. Dewatering in this region typically mean, like I said, submersible pumps, and they need to be capable of working at a wide range of heads, right? Because sometimes you'll be pumping, sometimes you won't be. It depends on where you're mining, depends on how much storage you have, depends on rainfall, depends on different things, right? So you need something that's capable of being efficient in a wide range of situations. You must deal with not only the mine workings you're dewatering, but groundwater inflow into those workings, right? So remember that some of these areas have been subsided, right? And that causes fractures into the overburden, which can both increase the vertical amount of flow as well as horizontally, right? You're looking at both in this case, increased um, flow rates for the groundwater. You need to also consider fractured overburden and water migration, right? So let's take this sort of slice again. And if you can imagine that we have fully extracted these pillars, right? So we've allowed this area to cave, we've had subsidence, potentially up into this other level. What you may see as this mine fills up with water and starts coming up the shaft is that, you know, it's not just this level in the shaft, it's also out here in the fractured overburden. It may even be coming up to such an elevation where this mine is now underwater, right? Because it's come up to this level. It's above the elevation of this mine. You may see uh, water come migrate through the overburden into a mine that's up here, flow around and come back into, say, another mine of yours over here, something like that. These are all situations that I have seen in real life, that I have come across, okay, that you might, want to think about. You also have to consider water from abandoned mines. Like I said, that's not just above you, but even adjacent to you. Even though you say, for example, have a barrier that's designed to impound water. See, these are very large barriers, in this area. Um, Even larger than that, you may see water inflows into your mine from quite a ways away. I'm talking thousands of feet. I mean, it just depends on how porous that coal is, that coal seam is, right? The porosity of it. Coal is an aquifer. Water is going to flow through it. Uh, So it depends on the seam, depends on where you're at in the seam, what mine you're in. But you can see water from quite a ways away. I've seen that myself in what we thought was increased inflows from a mine that was thousands of feet away. Because, like I said, like what I was just describing, even water barriers, right? They leak. This water is going to flow through here. Sometimes you even have to consider your own mine, right? Um, Barriers between panels, particularly if, say, for example, you have sealed them off, right? So, say you sealed this area, and now you cannot go back here and make observations anymore. You can't inspect it, right? For water. If that happens, and then you start mining over here, you need to consider that this could, in the future, impound water, right? So keep that in mind. One of the things you need to be looking at when you're laying out your mine is going to be the elevation of that coal seam, right? What elevation are you at in reference to everything around you, really? And, you know, um, that way you can, have a good idea of what the water is going to do when you do encounter it, right? So with that, I'm going to close it out. Basically, for the semester, I'm going to do a couple more videos and do some over the winter as well. Those will just be either special topics or maybe starting into classes for next semester, right? We'll be getting those up too. So that's it for this time, and I will see you next time.